In the streaming economy now, and not the sales era, but the streaming economy, it's a very long tail. If you're a writer who's writing for artists that are streaming successful, but not radio successful, it is a long time to earn the money on those songs because of how streaming pays, being so much less than those mechanicals in the sales era. So where sync comes into play is sync is that short tail, right? We could pitch a song that was written yesterday for a show, and if it gets placed, we're getting that money now.
What's going on? Welcome to the New Music Business. I'm your host, Ari Herstand, author of How to Make It in the New Music Business, the book. Third edition is out now. All formats, ebook, audiobook, hardcover, however you like books, you can find the book. Today, my guest is Marc Caruso. He is the CEO and co-founder of Angry Mob Music, an independent music publisher based in LA. And we talk all about publishing today, and we talk about what publishing is. So if you're just coming here cold and you don't actually know what publishing is or how to understand it, we start off by just breaking it down so we all have a foundation of what publishing is and what that means, what copyright that is, what the royalties are, how the money is made. I asked them to kind of give me a pie chart of where all their money comes from and how that money is made. We're talking lots of sync licensing. He breaks down the rates of what syncs are paying these days, from TV commercials to film placements, trailers, all that stuff. He does a really great job of breaking down the fees he's seen, these upfront fees. And we talk different kinds of royalties that are earned for things in music with microsync and TikTok and streaming, of course. And then we get into a bit of the advocacy conversation, and we kind of talk more macro music business, music industry. Towards the end, we really dive into a lot of the issues that have been making headlines as of late when it comes to Universal striking direct deal with Spotify and the implications around that. The MLC losing its lawsuit against Spotify, and we talk all about what that means and how that all went down and what that means for independent publishers and independent songwriters. Marc is an advocate in the industry. He was on the board, and he was actually the president of the LA chapter of the Association of Independent Music Publishers, AIMP. He's also a member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. He's a member of the Recording Academy, member of the Motion Picture Editors Guild, which I didn't mention before, but he is also a composer and a producer. He's an Emmy-nominated music editor. So he has a diverse range of experience across the industry, and he has that kind of composer's, musician's empathy that he brings to this. And he really helped illuminate a lot of these issues and break it down for you. So if you're interested in the business of songwriting and publishing, this is the episode for you. You can find Angry Mob Music on Instagram, on the socials. Check out their website. You can find all of us that make the show happen at Ari's Take on the socials. Find me at Ari Herstand on Instagram. But right now, if you wouldn't mind, just pause, visit aristake.com, get on the email list, and that's the best way to stay in touch with us, the best way for us to get info to you. Email list, aristake.com. And if you could leave us a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, that really helps. Just pause the episode right now, leave us that review, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up. However you're listening to this right now, leave us a comment. You can leave us a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and I love reading those comments. All right, let's kick it into the show. Marc Caruso, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ari. Thanks so much for having me here.
All right, of course. So today we're going to be talking mostly about publishing, and to just frame the conversation for those that may not understand what publishing is, let's just start super, super basic. Can you just break down what publishing is in music?
Absolutely. Okay, so imagine you are a singer-songwriter. You're in your bedroom studio and you write a song, but you don't record it. You write the song on sheet music, let's just say, right? And the lyrics and the melody. There is a song there, even though you haven't recorded it. That is the composition.
Yep.
right? And then you go and you record that song into Logic or GarageBand or Pro Tools, and now you have a recorded performance. So that's a recording. So publishers work on the composition side. So the song itself, and until you are with a publisher, you as a songwriter, you are self-published, and so you represent that copyright of that composition. And so, in the same way that record labels sign artists for recordings and to get those out to the public, publishers sign songwriters to write songs and then to get those songs either cut by artists, or if they are artists themselves, getting them out into the world. So we're like on the behind the curtain side of the industry, because I think as a fan, as a music fan, you really see the artist who is singing the songs that the songwriters write.
Super helpful. And I just to even break that down further, and I appreciate that you kind of mentioned it's you're representing the songwriters who write the songs, and then maybe they get cut, maybe they get recorded, because a lot of people, most people probably listening to this are both. They're songwriters and they're artists, and it's hard to distinguish, and when it comes to like the registration or the royalties or the representation, whether, publisher or record label, like you broke it down, because they're like, oh, well, I do it all. I record, I write the song. We're actually writing and recording at the same time, and then you just put it out. And so, that distinction, I would just want to like clarify it a little bit more, as in like, when we're talking about ownership and we're talking about representation, talk to me about just like break that down a little bit further of, songwriters or producers or artists, or maybe I'm all three, and how that distinction and why that distinction is important when it comes to ownership, representation with like, your company, a publisher versus a label, and royalties and all of that.
Yeah, I think so taking those three, songwriter, producer, artist.
Yes.
Let's say all three of those are in a session, in a room together, and they're going to write and record a song, right? So if the songwriter is the only one who is actually writing the song, so coming up with the lyric, with the story, maybe it was their song originally that they wrote and they're bringing it into the session. The producer is assembling the track, maybe choosing the instruments, sonically, how's it going to sound, really bring the recording into the world. And then the artist, if is in the room, is singing the songwriter's song that is being recorded. So now the artist is the performer on that recording. Okay, so now who owns what there?
Yeah.
The songwriter, again, if they were the only person who was actually writing the song, I'll get into where it gets a little gray, but just, for this example.
Yeah.
That songwriter would be represented by a publisher if they're signed. If not, they control their own publishing. That is the composition side, right? So that is in its own case. The artist, we'll say in this example, is signed to a label. So the label is going to own that recording and distribute that recording, promote the artist, everything they do to sell that recording. Now, the producer many times is engaged by the label or the artist, maybe, if it's a little more independent, and might be paid a fee, and then may, in additionally, earn some points, as they call it, a percentage of the income on the recording, not on the song. Right, so that's a really kind of simplified example where there's three roles that that don't overlap. Where it does overlap is a producer, while assembling the recording and kind of bringing that vision to life on the recording side, may be giving, might be writing music in a way. Maybe they've got beats or something specific that is in their producer toolkit, if you will. And then now you could say, well, they're a writer also. So now they have a piece of the songwriting. Same thing with the artist. But the artist's like, I don't like how this melody goes. I want to change it. Or this lyric line I want to change because it's not the story I want to sing.
Yeah.
Then there's a writing credit there too. Because if you take away the recording and you
Yes.
take the music and put it onto sheet music again, melody and lyrics and the chords, that's the song. So
Right.
did somebody have influence on the, on the sheet music version of a song?
Yes. Yes.
You could say that then there's songwriting involved.
Right. Super helpful. And then when we're talking publishing and publishers, publishing essentially can be used interchangeably with songwriting, right? It's just that's essentially the same
By
term.
copyright law,
Yeah.
the owner of the composition copyright is called a publisher. And the writer who created it is the author, if you will. And so the publisher is whoever is in control of the copyright, meaning has the right to license it, to earn money on it, to collect those royalties from those licenses.
Yeah.
That's the publisher. And again, if an independent songwriter is not published, they are songwriter and publisher self-contained.
Right. So that's a super helpful example. And then just to kind of take it in real world, more times than not, with the 3-person example, oftentimes all 3 of them may show up to a session without the song and write the song together. And so then theoretically, they're all equal owners of that composition, that song, because they had a hand in all writing it together. And then anyone could cut that after that. But maybe the artist decides to cut that song and record it, release it. And this is where I break it down as kind of, we haven't gotten into, but there are 2 copyrights to every recording. And we have the recording copyright, which then the record label and that artist would share in. And maybe the producer, like you mentioned, if they're going to get cut into some of those recording royalties, that's all part of that recording side. But then the songwriter, that's just a songwriter, is only really participating in those publishing royalties and that publishing, that composition copyright, which is the other copyright. We have these 2 copyrights, which is part of the full recording. Is that right?
Correct.
Cool. So let's talk, now that we kind of have this foundation of an understanding of like what publishing is and how that differs from recording, because I think this is in my experience and working with so many independent artists and songwriters, the most confusing part of the entire music industry is differentiating between those 2 copyrights, the recording side and the composition side. So today we're going to focus primarily just on the composition side, because that's what you work in publishing. So tell me about Angry Mob and tell me about kind of what you do as a publisher.
Yeah, absolutely. So Angry Mob Music, we co-founded this 16 years ago now.
Cool.
And we are an independent boutique music publisher. We are based in Los Angeles. And by boutique, we have a roster of about 10 active songwriters, but we account to about 300 publishing clients. Those might be songwriters that don't write anymore, members of bands. We do administration for other companies. I'll kind of talk about like what that means. It's to manage those composition copyrights on behalf of somebody else, but without owning them. And so, and for the most part, our genres among our catalog is predominantly pop, both mainstream and indie leaning, electronic, hip hop. We have some R&B as well. And then we administer for some of these other companies too. So we have some country publishers that work on the creative, and then we kind of handle all of the business side of it too.
Okay.
And and in terms of what we do for our writers, we have our A&R department that works on both the discovery of songwriting talent, as well as once they are signed, setting them up in those sessions with artists for their projects. If those songwriters are artists themselves, bringing in outside talent in those sessions to make sure to bring their own vision to life. So developing their career, if you will. And then once those songs are actually written, then if they're not already being cut by an artist, then we try to get them cut by artists. And when they are released, eventually, we collect all the royalties by making sure all the registrations with the societies are all done, that everything is, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed with that.
Sure.
Because as we know in the industry today, it's a lot of dollars, pennies, micro pennies. And so there's a very wide net, which is
Yeah.
a hustle to actually collect from all these sources. So our job is to hustle so the songwriter can just focus on what they do best, which is write songs. And then we also have a strong lean into TV and film advertising, the sync world. So we are based in Los Angeles, so much of the sync opportunities happen in this city. And so we have a very kind of strong sync department that also is trying to place the songs into TV shows and films.
Cool. Speaking of sync, and I guess just in turn and kind of the revenue that is generated for publishers and songwriters, in effect songwriters too. What have you been seeing over the last 5 years or so? If we were to take a kind of a pie chart here of revenue in publishing, at least in at your company or in the independent publishing world, where is the majority of the revenue coming from these days? Is it coming from sync? Is it coming from streaming in the form of mechanical royalties and performance royalties? Is it coming from performance royalties from radio? Are you really just swinging for the rafters every song trying to get that radio hit? Because we've had some hit songwriters on the show, and they've talked about the whole goal is to get a radio hit because that's where the money is for them. And when you get on the radio, which is so weird in 2025 for a lot of them to say like, oh, we want that radio hit. I'm like, radio? Who listens to the radio? What does that even mean? So like break that down for me in terms of a publisher when we're talking revenue. Where's the money coming from?
Well, years ago, the majority of the money came from mechanicals. So the money that would be generated for songwriters and publishers from record sales, physical sales. And when that declined,
because each time, so like in the sale, just to clarify, in the sales era, which still exists to some extent, but every song, it was like mandated by the government. This was set up that every song, if you sold that song or sold a record that had that song on there, each song was worth a certain amount of money. So like now it's around 12 cents or something per sale. Right, 12 cents. And that would be split amongst all the songwriters of that one song. So the record label, when they sold a record, they would have to pay out 12 cents, or now they'd have to pay out, would you say 12.5? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's like 12.9 now, I think.
12.9. Okay, so they'd pay out 12.9 cents on every record sale, on every CD, vinyl sale, cassette, whatever, or even a download, and the record company would pay that publisher, those publishers or the songwriters, 12.9 cents per each song. That's a mechanical royalty when it comes to sales, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and you said it earlier, the sales era. And then that era declined, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
when you look at using that pie chart example, if the mechanical piece of the pie was so large and then it diminished, it had to be, the other pieces of the pie had to naturally expand. And so it balanced out. Now, to jump to the last 5 years and today, performance about 5 years ago was the biggest piece of the pie. So performance royalties from radio. You said radio, right? From streaming, but 5 years ago, less so. And so what's happened over the last 5 years, there's been a little more equity and balance for songwriters in the streaming world. And that's brought up that mechanical piece of the pie has grown a little bit to actually make it a little more even. Now, regarding sync was kind of the third in line, maybe 10 years ago. Not by a lot, but enough. And then over the last 5 years, so many sync opportunities are out there now. So there's so much content being made by platforms, broadcasters, both linear and nonlinear, and so the sync pie has grown commensurate with the other pieces. And I think this last, we don't have the stats from this last year, but 2023, sync was the number 2, I believe, piece of that pie, which is huge. Right now, for a company like
The
ours,
stats you mean, are these stats published? What stats are you talking about
like
here? Are
the
you talking about the
publishing
Angry Mob
industry,
stats, or are you
yeah.
talking
So
about
from the National Music Publishers Association, they
Oh,
do
okay.
annual reports about the state of the industry. And about 2 years ago, sync was second highest. Now, I think that was momentary because I think with the rebalancing and whatnot, I think mechanical and performance have caught up again. But let me take it to an independent company like ours.
Sure.
We can look at, okay, so our company does not have, we are a frontline catalog. So we have active writers writing new songs. So the majority of our catalog, almost all of it, are releases within the last 8 to 10 years. And so what that means, though, is in the streaming economy now, and not the sales era, but the streaming economy, it's a very long tail. And if you're if you're a writer who's writing for artists that are streaming successful but not radio successful, it is a long time to earn the money on those songs because of how streaming pays being so much less than those mechanicals in the sales era. So where sync comes into play is sync is that short tail, right? We could pitch a song that was written yesterday for a show, and if it gets placed, we're getting that money now. If that same song is released and it's a streaming quote unquote success, that same amount of money that we earned from a sync on, let's say, a national television show would take years to make, right? And so sync is a big part.
Yeah. Right, because you can pay it upfront from that sync fee. They usually will pay a big upfront sync fee, and give me the. Let's talk numbers here. So what are the ranges when you're talking? You get a big sync or something, and I do want to break down. You alluded to it, but the different kinds of sync placements out there. I think the ones that everybody is most familiar with is like you get a Walmart commercial, which is somewhat one that I saw that you guys just got, and it's for Walmart to put a commercial on TV and on their socials and whatever, they need to get the license, the sync license, from the publisher who represents the songwriters, and from the record label that represents the recording, or if it's totally independent, from that artist or whatever. And they pay a bulk amount of money for that commercial, for that spot, that ad. But then we also know sync placements of like TV shows, and you get placed on the TV show or in a movie or something. Those are the things I think everybody understands as sync placements. So in terms of the fees, the upfront sync fees, not even mentioning the back end royalties, but for now, tell me about the ballpark of what you're seeing in terms
ranges
of fees these days. Yeah.
Let's see here. Let's start with what I would consider the kind of the lowest range of or the type that has the lowest range, and that'd be reality television. It's wall-to-wall music. Now, generally, many times reality shows, because they use so much music, they go to music libraries and do kind of one license to let them use any song in those libraries. But as a publisher, where we're placing individual songs, those fees can range anywhere between maybe $500 to $1,200, right? So somewhere in there. Then I'm going to only speak about the composition license, so not the additional recording license.
Okay, so and we can assume that whatever numbers you're saying can be doubled, because in sync, it's pretty much by and large equal 50-50 split in terms of the publishing and the recording and what they pay. Is that correct?
Generally, yes. When you're getting into a very there are times when that one-to-one starts to change, and that's if, again, this is a publishing thing.
Right.
Cover songs, right? So let's say an artist does a cover song of a famous composition,
Sure.
that composition, which is famous, is going to charge a much higher license than the recording of a cover if it's an independent artist, let's say, who's covering it, and it's not
Right.
Coldplay or whoever.
Right. Okay.
So generally 1-to-1. So yes. So in that reality programming range, that $500 to $1,200 will fluctuate in that range depending on, is it just the composition? Is it what we call all in, meaning it's both sides, both the record or the composition and the recording? But that's generally where kind of a la carte single song licenses are in the reality television world, just because they use so much music and they only have a limited budget.
Sure.
Okay, moving on up. Network television shows ranges for the composition side. We've seen anywhere between 5,000 to 20,000, depending on the use.
Okay.
And why it's such a wide range is how the song is used. Is it 8 seconds in the background of a restaurant? Is it a montage scene with no other sound and it's only music? Right. I mean, there's no end titles anymore in TV, but it's net title or main title, right?
Yeah.
But it's about how it's used. And with network, it's going across the country, and so it's that some of it is the fee that's being charged is somewhat commensurate with how many people will hear that song, how many viewers watch that show, right? So network television versus local or even reality.
So what is what does network television actually mean in this day and age? Because I think most people only really watch, well, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm living in a bubble here, but like most people I know only really watch Netflix or Max or Prime or Disney or Hulu. Or which one of those is network television? Or what do you mean by network television?
Okay, so network television would be certainly the traditional broadcast networks. CBS,
we're talking NBC,
ABC,
CBS,
right?
ABC.
Okay, so satellite and cable networks. Right, and now, but I'll also include other broadcast networks that aren't those big four, which would be the HBOs, the Showtimes. So those series on those. I'm calling them channels if I'm dating myself. Those channels. I'm calling network because, again, that show is airing on cable or satellite and it's reaching a wide audience in that one airing.
Okay. Right?
So kind of the same thing as ABC, CBS.
Okay.
To your question about a show on Hulu, on Netflix, those fees are going to be lower. So we've seen fees for Netflix series ranging from call it maybe 2,500 up to 8 or 10K. That'd be a very prominent spot at that point. And the reason why those are lower is the same reason that, to use the example earlier about, let's say, a Spotify stream versus that same song being played on radio. How many listeners at any one time, right? When you put on a show on Netflix, it's 1-to-1. Netflix is playing that show for you. Now they hope, and we all hope, there's a lot of yous watching that show and selecting it. Because it's on demand, it's 1-to-1. So the fees are lower because they can't instantly say, oh, we're going to pay for this song in this Netflix show, and they're going to guess how well it's going to be received. So they kind of hedged their crystal ball by paying less because they don't know how many, how popular that series is going to be. With a network show, they have things called ratings. They know the audience week to week on a show. If it's Game of Thrones, if it's House of the Dragon, if it's Grey's Anatomy, they know what the audience is at that point. So that's why those fees are higher, because they know it's going to reach a wider.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so that's pretty much all TV, I think, across the board, right? We have network, we have the cable, we have, streaming services, I suppose. And then for like commercials and like films or trailers or video games, what are we talking in
Yeah,
those areas?
let me do film first,
Okay.
because it is a little bit like television in the sense of there's a wide scale of films, right? There might
Mm-hmm.
be an indie film that's only going to a film festival, hoping it might get a distribution deal. It might be a major film from a big studio,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so ultimately, the budget of the film will dictate how much money is available for music. So if it's a
Mm-hmm.
big blockbuster film, the next Mission Impossible or something, big budget, they've got a music budget, they're going to spend it. And so the fees on a kind of call it an A-list film for a song can range. I mean, for a non-famous song, so for independent songs, can range anywhere from 8 up to 50, 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so
Just on
depending on
the
the use and
composition
all
side.
that,
Right.
prominence, but it can be a wide range.
Mm-hmm.
When you're getting into smaller independent films, obviously you can imagine everything starts to shrink. They only have so much money, and so
Sure.
independent film uses maybe $1,000, 500,
Mm-hmm.
maybe up to, we've seen for indie films, up to maybe 5,000 if they're really want a song and they have, it's really going to push the story in a certain scene, and so they have to
Mm-hmm.
have it. So
Cool.
and then advertising. So
Yeah.
you brought up trailers, promos. So promos are, for your audience, promos are advertising for television shows,
Sure.
or
Yeah.
streaming shows.
Yeah.
And now we're getting into marketing budgets, which are different than the production budgets.
Okay.
Many times, maybe you've read where a film had cost $100 million to make. That was the budget, and then they spent another $100 million to promote it.
Yeah.
Right? The trailers for that film are part of the $100 million promotion budget,
Mm-hmm.
and so a trailer, a promo, and a brand advertising ad is all advertising, and so
Mm-hmm.
those budgets are much higher. So for trailers, what we've seen for use of music is anywhere from 25,000 up to 100,000. Again, wide
Amazing.
range depending on how much of it is used,
Just on the publishing side, again.
popularity, so forth. For promos, it's a little bit less, but promos, at least so promos for streaming is they pay once up front, and then because they don't know how often or how long that will be on their platform, so they do a license just for one-time license, if you will.
Yeah.
Promos on, I'm calling network again, like cable and satellite weekly series is usually done where they will negotiate a fee for X amount of weeks. So maybe they're going to promote the show for 3 or 4 weeks, and each week it might be 8,000 a week for the use of the song in the promo. Advertising, in the sense of like advertising a product or a brand, the term's a little bit similar, where the ad campaign is going to run a certain number of weeks, and then you negotiate a fee for that. I go back to budget again, because budget is depending on the size of the company. So a company like Walmart, global, well, predominantly US, but in essence, a huge
company,
huge conglomerate, has a big budget, and so they want to spend that budget in the marketing just to make sure that it goes. So companies of that size, depending on the campaign and how long it's going to run, again, a little bit like trailers, kind of anywhere between, call it 35 for a completely unknown song, up to 100 for a kind of a indie hit. When you're getting into top 10 Billboard hits, you're getting into a different kind of stratosphere at that point.
Right. Okay, cool. So we touched most of the categories. I think I don't know if there's other categories we're not thinking
There's
of. I
things
guess.
like just advertising on YouTube,
Oh yeah, so
things.
that's a different part of thing. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's so the ads that you see on YouTube in between your videos, or maybe before your videos, many times now, if they're just advertising for that streaming, we've seen rates for those anywhere between as low as 500 up
Mm-hmm.
to maybe 7 or 8,000, kind of in a range
Mm-hmm.
for indie music. But it's, you forget there's advertising everywhere that we look. Like, we did an ad campaign maybe 2 years ago for a company that it was just advertising for TikTok, and it was only for like a fall sales campaign. It was for a clothing company, and so the range in there, was around maybe 8 to 10K.
And that's you're saying they could only run those ads on
Yeah,
the
social
TikTok
media
platform is what you're saying.
advertising
Okay,
is its
sure.
own category. Now, many times, if it's a big ad campaign on, call it television,
Mm-hmm.
then many times social media, is a part of that license, because they take that ad and then they repurpose it for social media ads or for YouTube ads,
Right.
and whatnot. So they're called cut downs. So they'll do cut downs of the ad
Okay.
for other ways that it can be put in front of the consumer.
A lot of companies, right, probably, and a lot of people don't realize that if you are advertising something, even on social media, you still need that sync license. And I think one of that local Ford dealership has learned the hard way, now being sued by Eminem recently, because they used "Lose Yourself" in an ad on social media, and they're like, "What? I can select the ad. You can find it in TikTok and on music. Why can't I just put it against my video?" And now they're
Yeah.
learning the hard way that you can't do that. I mean, you can do it in a personal
Mhm.
way and make a video with the music that's available freely on TikTok or Instagram. But when it comes to advertising a product, you need to actually
Yeah.
acquire a
If you're
sync license for that.
commercializing the
Yeah.
use of the song,
Right.
right? If you're using that song to sell something,
Mm-hmm.
then you need authorization,
Yeah.
approval, and then to actually pay for a license.
Got it. So now I want to move just a little bit in a different category, which I've always been curious about. Um, when we're not talking about brands, or we're not talking about advertising, and we're not even talking about in context usage in a TV show or movie or whatever, but this other category of sync, which is some people call micro sync, which
Mhm.
is the TikTok, the YouTubes, the Instagram, Facebook, all of these platforms that have music that has become a central part of their platform. Um, how have they obtained those rights to have the music on their platform? Can you and you can speak to just globally how that has worked, and even specifically on the publishing side, and how have they gotten the rights to your copyrights for these platforms?
Yeah. Let's take YouTube, because I think it's the
Okay.
easiest example about how microsync works.
Hmm.
And when we say microsync, micro really is just meaning the fact that the cost of the license is so much lower than what it would be for a television show or an
Okay.
ad campaign for Walmart. So if anyone has put up their own videos on YouTube and they've had music in their video, they may have encountered one of two things. One is somebody else started to run an ad on your home video that you put up with your song, or you got a notice that you don't have a license for that song, and you have to take it down. That's usually one of the two routes,
Hmm.
right? And so the deal with YouTube is this: rights owners of music share in the advertising that is in videos that is advertised on top of the videos that are using your music.
Sure.
And micro licensing, what that does is, let's say I want to use a song and my channel is monetized, so I earn from advertising of the videos that I put up on YouTube. If I want to keep that advertising money on a video that has music that somebody else owns, I can get a license to use that music and then keep the advertising revenue. So it's an authorized video, it's a licensed video. This sharing in the advertising money from rights holders is for unauthorized uses of your music. So it's a way to compensate the rights holders without taking it down, without taking those videos down. So there are companies out there that saw this need of creators and rights holders, and they put themselves in between and said, well, there are so many creators putting up videos on YouTube, and we want them to be properly licensed, or we see a business there. And so let's work with the publishers and the record labels to create a catalog of music that if you're a video creator on YouTube, you could go to the catalog and buy a license for the videos that you are going to use as music. Plus, you get all this music that you can license in one central spot, searchable by genre, all of that. And so those microsync companies kind of had situated themselves there in that space. And for a company like ours, we actually work with some microsync companies because it would be too laborious for us to be able to manage that ourselves.
Right, and I believe the Music Bed is one of them. We had Music Bed on the show previously, and there's these other companies, and they're known by creators like YouTube creators to go. It's almost a marketplace where it's like I can pay for a license and get a bunch of music or get one of these songs or something like that, and then I know that I'm not going to be dinged with a copyright notice from YouTube, or they're not going to take my video down, and I'm above board in that respect, right? Okay.
One of MusicBed's big customer base, which is interesting. Maybe they said it when they were on your show. Wedding videos.
Right.
Videographers, right? Because the videographers, after the wedding, after they shoot it, they do, they basically make a music video of the wedding, right?
Yeah.
Music. So the videographers go to a company like MusicBed, choose the music, so that way the happy couple can tell all their friends, go to this YouTube link, here's our wedding video, and it stays up without getting taken down.
right, exactly. Cool. So now, okay, so I understand that you're gonna get if somebody a creator uses a song where they didn't officially license it, you're gonna get paid as the publisher of that song based on some of the share in that advertising. Not to get into the inner workings and too much into the weeds of like how that works. I know YouTube is insanely complicated, and we've heard the stories of how people have successfully been able to like siphon off some of that revenue if it's not properly claimed. I mean, you talk about that you've done some, you do admin work at Angry Mob. I mean, I feel like as much as I've learned about YouTube, it's so complicated. Like, do you outsource that, or do you have that in-house that somebody is like managing all of the YouTube intricacies because it's so complicated?
No, we actually outsource that because to that exact reason, it would be so time sensitive,
right?
And kind of a very time suck, really, to actually administer what's called Content ID. So Content ID is YouTube's system to find unauthorized uses of your music, and then you can either claim or issue a takedown. And so we actually outsource that. So what we do is we have all of our publishing data about our catalog, our songs. We have recordings of our songs that we give to our vendor, and then our vendor puts those into the YouTube Content ID system. The recordings are used to be able to match the uses of the music as best as possible, and then our vendor, if you will, then sees those reports, sees what potentially could be claimed. So it's called a claim when there's an unauthorized use, and to claim those videos and then receive a share for the rights holders from the advertising revenue.
Yeah, YouTube, as complicated as it is, it's relatively straightforward. I think everybody can kind of understand, there's an ad on that, somebody's earning from that, then the rights holders should earn, from that, whether it's the label or the publisher, the song. That makes sense. What I've never understood is when it comes to TikTok or Instagram, Meta, Facebook, and I'm just gonna put out there what I've heard and read and seen, and you can correct me or tell me how this has actually worked. But it's like, my understanding was, especially because there aren't ads on TikTok or Instagram like there are on YouTube. YouTube is longer videos. They can throw an ad before the video, can throw an ad after it. You know, the ads on TikTok are different. When you're swiping through, there's an ad and it's not like attached to that video, where that video, if you use a song in that, they can share in the music, the ad revenue. When it comes to TikTok or Instagram, Meta, Facebook, is it true that the way that these tech platforms were able to license the music was they essentially struck deals with the major labels and the major publishers, maybe via the the RIAA representing the major labels, or the NMPA representing the major publishers, and basically the deal that they struck and is essentially, here's a ton of money, please go away. We're going to figure it out. Come back to us in 5 years, but be happy with all this money that we're throwing at you. Whether you want to trickle that down to your artists or songwriters is up to you. We don't care. Here's a bunch of money. Please go away. We'll figure it out. And that's been kind of happening over the last 10 years because, from my understanding, they haven't actually figured it out like YouTube's figured it out. But please correct me if I'm wrong. What has actually gone down? That's just what I have assumed.
Short answer. You're not wrong.
Sweet. Okay.
Yeah. So with Meta, originally Facebook,
Right.
yes, that was what they did. Is they struck a deal, and I can speak to the publishing side.
Yeah.
So they struck a deal through the NMPA that said, here is a settlement amount of money for the use of music on our platform. We don't have the ability at this stage to be able to dissect, to have a system in place like YouTube does, where you can take it down, you can monitor it, all of that, identify it. So currently, for the time being at least, it is a legal settlement, and the idea is, here's the money, don't sue us. And then so we said, okay. There were companies who were initially trying to build for Facebook a version of Content ID.
Mm-hmm.
But that had petered out once the settlement happened, because now there wasn't the motivation, because there wasn't a threat of being sued unless they had this system. Okay,
right.
So in the time being, yes. To your point about Instagram specifically and TikTok, as you noted, there are not videos that are overlaid or imposed on the user-generated content that is uploaded. They are independent spots, which is why I said earlier we did a TikTok ad campaign for a clothing company. So the ad that while you're swiping, you're going to come across a sponsored post or a sponsored ad. That's a license thing done through a company that did all the proper licenses and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, everything you said was absolutely right.
Oh, so okay, but now what's tough is that there are so many independent songwriters out there that first off, who does the NMPA represent?
So the NMPA represents all music publishers. So majors and indies alike. So it is our United States national trade organization. So and by representing us, they act on our behalf for legislation, for advocacy. They're on Capitol Hill anytime that there's potentially something within Congress that can get done to benefit the publishing industry. They litigate. So they go after bad actors, as we call them. So unlicensed platforms, and then they will fight for licenses for on behalf of publishers that can't do it themselves. So a major publisher can strike their own deal, but independent publishers don't have that size or leverage to. So then we rely on the NMPA to actually strike those deals.
Oh, so they do represent independent publishers as well as the majors. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So then
it's
what's
all
the difference?
Music publishers.
Got it. And then the Association of Independent Music Publishers, AMP, How is that different from what
So
is that?
AIMP, and full disclosure, I was the former LA chapter president of the AIMP, and I'm still on the board.
Mm-hmm.
The AIMP's mission is to promote and advocate on behalf of independents specifically, independent music
Cool.
publishers specifically. It's also to
Got it.
educate, and then to advocate. But we're
Great.
not a trade group, so we can't strike or negotiate licenses, let's
Okay.
say, on
Got it.
behalf of independents. I mean,
Okay.
from a personal standpoint, I feel like there needs to be a body that does
Yeah.
that, because the
Yeah.
independent record labels do have that. They have Merlin. So
Right.
with Merlin, if you're an independent label below a certain market share, then you can join Merlin, and Merlin will negotiate licenses with platforms or whomever on behalf of those kind of small to medium sized independents. We don't have that
And
on the publishing side.
colloquially, people call Merlin kind of the fourth major because of the amount of copyrights that Merlin is representing, the amount of indie labels that they're representing. It's a big part of the market
Mhm.
share, and so you have the three majors: Universal, Sony, Warner, and then Merlin on the record label side. Kind of Merlin represents so many independent labels that they have a good negotiating power when it comes to that as
I'll
well.
give you a great kind of counterpart here where there's a challenge on the publishing side, which is this.
Yes.
Independent, okay, three major publishers, right? So on the publishing side, Universal Music Publishing,
Mhm.
Sony Music Publishing, Warner Chappell.
Yep.
Sony is the largest of the three major publishers, at least as of the end of 2023. They have about a 25% market share at that point.
Okay.
Independent publishers, so of all sizes, there are independents that are almost pseudo majors from their size, but
Yeah.
independent publishers from that size all the way down to a one person shop in their home.
Hmm.
Together, now there are thousands of those independent publishers. Together, it's a 40% market share. But we don't
Wow.
have a Merlin to be able to represent that 40% market
Why
share.
not?
It's always been kind of discussed. It's discussed in kind of in cocktail parties, if you will.
Yeah.
Like, we
Yeah.
need this. I think some of it is, like, the NMPA, who represents us, does a
Yeah.
tremendous
Hmm.
job on Capitol Hill, tremendous job with the litigations that they've gone through, with the negotiations with the platforms, but they're representing the interests of the majors as well as the independents, and
Right.
independents have different different needs, because a major who is represented by the NPA can go and strike their own deal with
Right.
Spotify, with a TikTok.
Hmm.
They've got direct deals, but
Hmm.
independents don't have that ability to. So would independents benefit from a Merlin? Absolutely. Is that the only solution? Not necessarily, because at the same time, we don't want to dispower what the NMPA does. So there are other kind of solutions out there,
Yeah.
but
Well, I mean, I have sensed over the years that the NMPA, to be honest, I thought they only really represented the majors because of just what it has seemed like public facing, where their interest has lied, and that, like, it is they're more or less beholden to kind of what they essentially work for the publishers, but the majors being the biggest and have the most power, you know, there seems to be, right, they're looking out for the majors' best interests. I mean, all publishers, but it's tough because, like you said, the majors, I mean, not only are they so massive and they can strike deals directly, they also have a recording side of their business. So Sony Music being the biggest publisher, but Sony also has a bunch of record labels under it. As a, Universal Music Group, Universal Music Group has a bunch of record labels on the recording side, and then Universal Music Publishing Group. And so it's like, at the end of the day, like, it's kind of a conflict of interest when you're thinking about, like, well, we got to, keep our record label side happy, and so we can't really fight against, that. Whereas, like, publishing is paid on the recording side so much less than what the labels are paid. So like a stream, and what a lot of people don't realize is like a stream on Spotify, the vast majority amount of money that it comes from a Spotify or Apple Music stream, which is not much, but the vast majority amount of that fraction of a penny is going to the recording side, is going to the record labels. And then what, like 20% or so?
Yeah,
20,
yeah, you're exactly right. It's about 4 to 1, 5 to 1 is that difference.
And then that's split up between mechanicals and performance royalties. But we just saw this go down with Universal striking a direct deal with Spotify. And, I'm still trying to make heads or tails of this, but it's essentially, I'm assuming that now Spotify is not going to have to pay or typically, so just to break this down, because it's a very confusing topic, but it's really important and it's super illuminating. It's just like, okay, on the publishing side, Spotify and Apple, they're paying out two kinds of royalties, like you mentioned before. There's performance royalties and there's mechanical royalties for streams, and that amounts to about 20% or so, 25% of the total money that's paid out. The rest going to the labels. So of that, mechanicals is more or less half of that 20% or so, and because Spotify has this new premium offering of bundling audiobooks together, they have now said like, oh, we don't actually have to pay as much in mechanical royalties based on what the government says, because we're not just a standalone music product, we're a bundled music product. And so that dramatically slashes the amount that they need to pay. The MLC sued them and like, well, you can't do that. MLC lost. Spotify won that. And so Universal's like, well, forget it. We're big enough. We're just going to go straight to you and be like, you know what? Forget all these other guys. Let's just do this direct, you and us, and you pay us a bigger amount. And to me, I saw, and then I saw the NMP celebrating that. And it was kind of like Universal and David Ellsworth and the NMP came out with a thing saying, well, this is very hopeful. And it shows that this is going to, a rising tide lifts all ships. I'm just like, but does it? Or is Universal just looking out for Universal, and then everyone else is going to have to fend for themselves and accept the dramatically lower mechanical royalty rate?
There's a few ways to look at it. So specifically with this deal between Universal and Spotify.
Yeah.
David Israelite is right in the regard that it does provide a measure of hope and optimism that Spotify is open to making deals that provide a little more equity and value to the publishers.
Okay.
Then, because they did, just to go to this bundle topic that you talked about. So what happened was, when it was a music-only product, it was being paid at a certain mechanical rate that was rising, and it's a complicated formula of
about 15% or so is what they were paying out, right?
And so when they converted all the users to this bundle where the audio books, it's like 15 hours of audiobook listening, I think, or 11 hours, is built into your subscription, which nobody knew about, by the way, that they had audiobooks in their subscription. I didn't until it was
right.
Until the light had shone on it. Yeah. But what's written into the law is that you can take the value of the audiobooks and deduct it from the royalty that's paid to the music publishers, because now there's this other offering, right? So that's the bundle, right? So you extract that, and that's where the MLC came in, and the industry said, okay, well, Spotify, it's not really a bundle because people didn't know that they had this audiobook. So you didn't advertise, you have audiobooks now.
Right.
It was buried on the site in the platform if you wanted to switch from this bundle that you're now in to a music only, which would then pay full royalties or the previous royalty.
But by default, everyone had the bundled premium subscription, which like no one was like opting into the music only. Nobody even knew how to do that. Right?
Nobody knew how to do it, right? So to go to this universal, so now to take it back to this universal deal, there is optimism that maybe Spotify is seeing that Okay, this is a very strong assumption, saying that, okay, maybe we can work a little better here, that we don't have to go back to war with the music publishers, because we were in a war with
Okay.
Spotify for so long.
Right.
So there's optimism there, yes. Okay, but what this really shines a light, as an independent publisher, my company, Angry Mob, wouldn't have the leverage to go and strike that Universal deal like they did.
Right.
Alone, right? So we're beholden to somebody representing us. In this case, it would be the NMPA. So it's encouraging that David Israelite is encouraged, because maybe he can say, okay, Spotify, you did something good here. Let's keep doing that, and let's work on something for all of our publisher members.
But what I don't understand is, why didn't the NMPA speak to Universal and say, hey, why don't we work together on this and let us go and negotiate a higher mechanical royalty rate outside of what the Copyright Royalty Board has, and what the phono records for whatever the latest based what the law states of what they're supposed to pay in mechanical royalties. Why don't we just negotiate collectively for all publishers for the music industry? Why did Universal just go and do this on their own without working with the industry?
Because I think the three majors have always done their own direct deals, right? And this is a little bit of the rub that, it is, again, just speaking personal opinion.
Sure.
With regards to the, call it the steering of the NMPA, because the three majors are on the board of the NMPA, which provides direction and the guidance as to how the NMPA approaches things, but they're not beholden to the licenses that are negotiated by that same group, right? So Universal, Sony, and Warner can have influence over what the NMPA does on behalf of independents, but they're providing guidance, but they don't have to follow that guidance. They can strike their own direct deals, right? So that's a little bit of the rub there. But with Universal, I think history. There's a history of the three majors do their own deal making. It's like last year with TikTok, right? Universal's deal with TikTok expired. They didn't have a new deal. Universal started to pull all their music off of the platform in terms of user-generated content that would go up there. And that included the publishing side. So songs that had one universal writer only were all getting pulled, because it didn't happen. Most independents were under a license, a similar license with a TikTok, either through the NMPA or through another company called Music Reports. Similar licenses. And the licenses with TikTok up to that point were pretty bad. Meaning that publishers were paid, and I think this was the same for the label side as well, on how many independent videos were made using that piece of music. Right? So if it's a song of ours and 1,000 videos were made, we'd be paid that rate for 1,000 videos. Didn't matter how many views. So unlike other platforms and everything else in the industry, you're paid on views or audience size, like we were talking about earlier. Like YouTube, it's number of views. So bad deal. Anyway, Universal saw that. They pulled all their music when the deal expired. They eventually got a deal done. The NMPA's deal was expiring just a couple months after that, and the NMPA license expired, and the NMPA did not negotiate a new license. So independents were now on their own to either try to do a direct license, which rarely happened, or they would then move over to this Music Reports license, which was still in that kind of bad form. So let's jump back to now Universal and Spotify. I think Universal had this history. There's no benefit to them to not strike their own deal and to do it on behalf of, to let the NMPA negotiate it, because they're looking out for their own interests, and they have every right to do so.
Yeah. I just, Right. It's frustrating, as like an indie artist and indie artist advocate. It's just that like it doesn't seem that the playing field is very fair here, and it's kind of like, why should the largest music company in the world get paid more than indie artists? Like, why? They're already rich, they're already
Mhm.
superstars, they're already making the most amount of money, and we're here trying to just grab scraps wherever we can grab them. And it's kind of like, a lot of people don't realize is that there isn't a cost per stream.
Mhm.
That's the biggest myth of the streaming era, is that streaming pays 0.003, whatever. That doesn't exist. Is that every label negotiates their own license with Spotify and Apple and all the other streamers, and that they are negotiating that rate, and it's different for all this. So we can assume, and there's been some very good reporting done on this, that the majors are actually getting paid more. So one stream from a major label from an identical listener is actually going to pay more than one stream from an independent label or an indie distributor, which to me is just like the most unfair thing that has ever existed. They're already rich. Why are they? It's like it should be a level playing field. And so when I hear all of this stuff, and you run an independent music publisher, like I'm curious, like where you come down on all of these inequities when we're on one hand, it's like, well, we're the music industry and we should be advocating and fighting on behalf of the music industry. You know, it's always us versus tech. And like, that's what it's
Mhm.
been. And like, all right, this is the war and the battle. But then I'm also looking at this as like, well, the majors aren't looking out for us. Are they really looking out for the indies? And you said the indies hold 40% of the market share on the publishing side, and it's about 35% on the recording side. Like, what are we supposed to do here, and who is kind of leading this front, and like how do we truly level this playing field?
Yeah, the three majors on the publishing side are always going to act in their own
Mm-hmm.
best interest, right?
Sure.
And I mean, it's a fact of life in any industry. Market leaders are going to act in their own interest.
Right.
This idea that the thousands upon thousands of indie publishers can have a collective voice, that's where then now there can be some equity with the majors. So if the
Mm-hmm.
three majors struck their own deals, and maybe the terms of those deals are similar, and maybe some are different, all depending on the individual negotiations, but they become models, right? I mean, and that's a little bit of the problem with the majors having such influence in the industry, is what
Mm-hmm.
they do influences the rest of the industry. And so if Universal's deal, and this might be a bit about where David Israelite has hope and optimism in this Universal deal,
Yeah.
is if that becomes a model for other licenses, then that does benefit the other sides of the publishing industry, or the other parties.
Okay.
So I don't know where Sony or Warner is in this negotiation timeline, if they even are, but the idea I'm sure they're saying is, if Universal can strike a deal, then so can we. And maybe what David is saying is, if these three can strike a deal that benefits their songwriters, maybe we can for the rest of the publishing industry, right?
Which is going
So,
to be because there already is an agreement in place that the NMPA already did strike with the streamers through DEMA
and the
and
MMA.
that is right, and that is what's written into the law. That is what the Copyright Royalty Board
Mhm.
overseas, and that is was agreed to a couple years ago, and that was the 15% essentially royalty rate for mechanical royalties on streams. And it was overlooked. I'm not sure how this went through, or they didn't have the foresight to understand what bundles would be, or maybe they got caught with their in now, like the NMPA just like didn't negotiate this effectively, or I don't know what happened or what went down, but like how did they not, like not see that this was coming, or that the bundles, they agreed to this deal and now they're like, wait, this is a bad deal? It's like, but you guys were supposed to advocate on our behalf. You made the deal. Everybody agreed to the deal. Now the Copyright Royalty Board is enforcing this deal and this agreement and this law that the NMPA agreed to. So I'm like, what happened here?
Well, I mean, everything. Now, I wasn't on the inside of those negotiations,
Sure.
but
Yeah, right.
just kind of, armchair quarterbacking it.
Right.
There's a lot of give and take in that deal to actually get it across the line. It almost failed at the 11th hour, but
yeah,
so if giving up the bundle issue, or being aware of it and knowing that it is a potential liability down the road, if that was the give to get the rest of the MMA done, or not the MMA, but that deal that actually got it there, that's overall, songwriters and publishers still benefited, even though we're getting into this,
right. So it sounds, and you wrote an op-ed for Billboard, why it's time for indie publishers to get angry. And I'm, I'd like you to speak to that a little bit. And I mean, you're very level-headed. You're very calm and collected. I'm the fiery one where I'm ready to just I'm read that. I was like, all right, I'm angry.
No.
I'm reading out everything. I'm already angry. I'm not an indie publisher, but what is the solution? What are you suggesting or advocating for, and what are we supposed to do as an independent music community to solve this, or to
I think
that's right.
Okay, so let's take it from kind of the individual on up. As an individual songwriter, it's being educated about what's happening in the industry. So joining the organizations that are already out there. So if you're a songwriter or independent publisher, joining the AIMP. If you're an independent songwriter, also maybe joining SONA, the Songwriters in North America. They do great education and advocacy work. On the independent label side or the independent artist side, joining a group like A2IM that also has a real mission to educate and advocate. And these organizations speak specifically to independence. And my utopian dream here is that independent voice, is what we were talking about earlier here, can be collected. Now, the idea of a Merlin for publishers, I don't think is necessarily the perfect solution, but I think what could happen is if let's say it's the AIMP, can collect as members a great pool of independent publishers and self-published songwriters. I mean, I would advocate lobbying for a board seat for the AIMP with the NMPA. So now there's a voice at the table that is influencing the decisions that the NMPA does alongside our major counterparts and the very large independents and the independent or the individual songwriters who are also now a part of the NMPA board, or at least as of a couple years ago. So having a seat at the table for independence would be tremendously important, but that seat isn't achieved if we remain so fractured. We have, again, thousands upon thousands of independent publishers and self-published songwriters. So it's really gathering those. So the rallying call to action for songwriters and independent artists is to join the organizations and become involved. And by being involved doesn't mean you have to go and march on Washington. It just means be educated, advocate for yourself publicly in social media and what you're already doing about the value of what you do. Treat yourself, respect what you do as having intrinsic value. And that was the point of the op-ed, of just the fact that no matter who you are in the independent sector, we all have the same goals, which is to be treated fairly, to be compensated for our work, and to be respected. And so we want those, and to do it as a lone voice doesn't have as much leverage and kind of power. And so, but together, it's a cliche, but that stronger together is absolutely true.
Yeah.
And that was the point of that op-ed.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And well, I hope there is continued independent advocacy like this, and that maybe the board seat, or maybe whether it's through the NMPA, whether through other means, but I feel like we are inching towards this tipping point of just, if we zoom all the way out and are looking at the music industry, it's just becoming less sustainable than ever to be in music and to be an independent artist or songwriter. I mean, we we're running out of time, but I mean, we could talk for hours about the challenges of being an independent or a songwriter, whether you're independent or major. Any songwriter in general, it's just like, the shift to streaming. There's less money, and if there's only so many hits that are on the radio, that's like paying the bills, and only so it's things are going to need to shift and change, and we need these advocacy organizations that are fighting on behalf of all of us. So absolutely.
Yeah, we live in a time now where people's voices can have reach. We didn't have that 20 years ago, right? So if you're an independent songwriter, independent artist, you have a platform on your social media, for example, to be able to voice your opinion about things, and I encourage independent creators to do that. And so that's why this idea of kind of educating yourself, hey, there's an industry that really affects what I do in my songwriting, in my, recording. And so just if you understand where those challenges are that are out there, then you can really start to move things and gather up those around you, who you work with, your tribe, if you will, and be involved. And it's like any other social cause, but in this case, it's an industry cause that affects you directly.
Yep. Awesome. Right on, Mark. Well, thank you so much for all of this and your insight into this. And I had like 50 other questions that I wanted to get in with you, but we go where the conversation takes us, and I appreciate your transparency and your education. And Professor Caruso showed up today, so that was very helpful early on. I'm sure so many people learned so much, and they'll sign up for your next semester seminar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. It's the 201 course.
Right, 201. Right. So this is 101 today, and so we'll have to have you back for 201. So anyway, I have one final question that I ask everyone who comes on the show, and that is, what does it mean to you to make it in the new music business?
Yeah, I would say, when you look back and you reflect, did you make an impact? And that impact doesn't have to be seismic. It can be, and that is wonderful. But it can also, did you impact somebody, a person who you worked with, a colleague? Did you impact them in a positive way? Right? Were you great to work with? Did you bring them in on a session, and that sparked something that helped their career? If you're on the industry side, did you help those that needed help? So when you reflect, what was your impact on the industry? And if you had an impact at any level, then you were successful. Outside of, were you able to pay your bills and everything else, that would be a baseline for making it. Sure. But really, it's about the people who you touched. Nice. Right? Did you leave a positive legacy for yourself? That, to me, is making it in the industry.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you, Ari. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Today's episode was edited by Ari Davids, with music by Grassroots District, and produced by all the great people at Ari's Take.